Hey everybody, what's up? Matthew here. Thank you so much for checking into the YouTube channel. Hey, it's Friday afternoon and it's raining outside, so let's talk a little bit of contemporary culture, shall we? I'm sure you've heard by now that Tucker Carlson was fired from Fox News, and that's kind of the news that everybody's been talking about. Big drop of information recently, and everybody's got an opinion, everybody's got a hot take. So with that, let me give you my little hot take on Tucker Carlson, I suppose. Well, I am, I guess you could say, a regular watcher of Tucker Carlson, no question about that. I usually watched him in the evening a little bit. I would start it late and skip over the commercials, and then I would kind of tune out once the guests started to be interviewed. But the thing I appreciated about Tucker Carlson, I think maybe some of you did too, is that he did not seem to be beholden to anybody. And I really appreciate that. You know, there are very few people left in our media at all that are what we might call truth tellers. Now, let me just be very careful about that and kind of qualify it. I'm not saying that Tucker Carlson told the truth all the time. In fact, there was a lot of times where I'd very vehemently disagree with Tucker Carlson. I think he'd not be considered somebody reliable to get your theology from at all. And I really hesitate when I hear of people who get their worldview from any one particular thinker, whether it's some popular personality, some commentator, some radio host, even a particular theologian that they think is very excellent. Don't be a one-person guy, so don't get your worldview from any one particular thinker. I think that's pretty dangerous in general. There's so many people that have their one person that they really listen to, and they just let that person just influence their entire mind. That is not that for me. For Tucker Carlson. Having said that, what I mean by a truth teller is simply this. There are very few people left at all that are willing to challenge the status quo. One of the things that I liked about Tucker was that he very often ran up against the Democratic Party, and he very often ran up against the Republican Party too. He challenged both of them, and usually fairly consistently. In fact, the last thing you could really accuse Tucker of being is some sort of partisan shill. He definitely was not. Tucker would have all kinds of guests on his shows, and sometimes people that were diametrically opposed to the worldview, for instance, that I would hold. Tucker Carlson very often had on representatives from PETA who would sometimes share stories. Well, I can't say all the time, but more than once I saw representatives from PETA. He would get Glenn Greenwald, who definitely does not share my worldview on a lot of things, although there are some things in which I do agree with Glenn Greenwald. But there was a number of things that Tucker really adamantly challenged, and I find that there's so few people willing to courageously do that anymore. Challenging the idea of the military-industrial complex, challenging the big pharmaceuticals, challenging big tech, and certainly challenging the two big political parties. Who left is there to do that? Certainly very few people in the mainstream media. Can't turn on CNN, can't turn on MSNBC. And now, what, are we not going to be able to turn on Fox to hear somebody challenge the establishment? We need those people who are bold enough to challenge the establishment. Now, let me say this. There's one thing that Tucker Carlson used to do all the time that I can't stand, because I like logic and I am a collector of formal and informal fallacies. Tucker Carlson was really bad at strawmanning his opponent's positions. He would do this almost every single night. He would have a clip, a partial clip from somebody, and then he would reframe what they just said in his own words, and usually far worse than the way that the other person said it. Now, some people may say that's just plain talk, but I do think there's a very formal and fair way to do verbal deliberation, and that is, if you can't restate your opponent's arguments in a way that is satisfactory to them, then we might say you haven't really understood that position. So a lot of times Tucker Carlson would very unfairly, I think, reframe people's statements and make them far worse than the actual wording which he would usually quote. And I think a lot of people didn't even really catch on to that because they're not nearly as trained in the fallacies and things like that. So what is going to happen to Tucker Carlson? Well, first of all, we know this. His video clip that he showed on Twitter got millions and millions and millions and millions of views, way more than the replacement on Fox's 8 o'clock p.m. slot. In fact, I think it's going to tank. I think Fox is going to suffer for this big time. I think they let go probably the one person that did have a fresh voice. I mean, here's the problem. There's just so much recycled rhetoric on both sides. You can take practically any issue, and I can tell you predictably what the parties are going to say about that. If it has to do with gender and sexuality, I know what the Democrats Democrats are going to say with that. If it has to do with taxes or spending or the border, I pretty much know what the Republicans are going to say about that. But Tucker was one of those people that would legitimately surprise me, because at least he had the gall to run up against the powers that be. And I'm afraid that there's too few people that are going to be able to do that anymore. Even with Fox was kind of the one holdout in the mainstream media that would at least challenge the status quo about things like COVID or gender or sexuality or racism from time to time. Racism, just like Tucker used to say it, right? You have to have a few people that are willing to challenge that. I just wonder who's going to do it anymore. Usually now what you have to do is you have to go to your non-mainstream sources. So you've got to listen to your Jordan Petersons, you've got to listen to your Joe Rogans, you've got to listen to your Megyn Kelly's or your Ali Beth Stuckey's or your people from PragerU or wherever else you're going to get your stuff. I'm very frustrated with the fact that it does seem like cancel culture got another one here. I don't know what pressures Fox was feeling internally. It probably had to do with the Dominion lawsuit, no question about that. I've heard rumors that it had to do with Tucker's increasing speech related to spirituality. But again, Tucker is no theologian. He is the guy who just a few months ago got busted big time by anybody who knows any theological wherewithal whatsoever for saying that nobody is born with sin. And he was trying to make a racial point here that neither whites nor blacks are born with sins that the other kind isn't, the other race isn't born with. But instead, he accidentally argued for a position that denied original sin. So he is not the person to get your theology from. But it's just kind of frustrating, isn't it, that somebody that at least had the gall to challenge the status quo, big pharma, big tech, all these kinds of things, big politics, now we've lost that voice at all entirely from the mainstream media. Who was going to replace him? Probably nobody of importance or interest, I would say. Here's what I hope happens to Tucker. I hope he gets a huge deal like Joe Rogan got with Spotify, making about $10 million. I think Tucker was making $20 million. I hope he gets one of those $100 million deals. I hope he moves over to something that's easily accessible. I don't want to get some new app. I don't want to have to go and get some app on my phone that I don't have. I don't want to have to look at some channel that I don't really get from my cable or whatever it is. I hope he moves over to something that's easily accessible, like Megyn Kelly, maybe a podcast or YouTube or something like that, where we can all still watch his stuff on the daily and continue to get his interesting, though often disagreeable takes. Very often I agreed, very often I did disagree. But I hope at least wherever he goes, he gets an accessible deal so that people can get his content easily and on the fly. That's my 2 cents. I'd love to hear yours in the comment section of this video. Thanks for checking in. Love you lots. Talk to you later.